July 1943. A Sherman tank commander named Lieutenant James Bates is positioned along a dusty road in Sicily, waiting. His hands are trembling slightly on the controls, not from the heat, but from something else entirely. Through his periscope, he sees it, emerging from the tree line like some kind of iron demon, massive, angular, the thick armor gleaming dully in the Mediterranean sun. A tiger. The Germans called it the Panzerkampfwagen VI, but to the men who faced it, it was simply the tiger. And in that moment, Bates knows. His 75-millimeter gun, his thin armor, none of it matters anymore. He's staring at a machine that can kill him from over a mile away, while he'd need to be within spitting distance to even scratch its paint. This is the Tiger tank, and this is the story of the beast that made grown men question whether they'd see another sunrise. The year is 1942. The German Wehrmacht is locked in brutal combat across multiple fronts: North Africa, the Eastern Front, the Atlantic Wall. And they're facing a problem, a significant one. Their Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, once the pride of the Blitzkrieg, are meeting their match. Soviet T-34s with their sloped armor and 76-millimeter guns, they're trouble. British Matildas with their thick hides, they're proving difficult. The German High Command realizes something critical. They need a heavy tank, something with firepower and protection that dwarfs anything currently on the battlefield. They need a monster. Enter Henschel und Sohn, a German company tasked with creating this new weapon. The specifications are demanding, almost absurd for the time. Armor thick enough to shrug off most anti-tank weapons, a gun powerful enough to penetrate any enemy armor at range. Reliability, well, that one might have to wait. The result of this ambitious project rolls off the production line in August 1942. 56 tons of steel, rage, and German engineering. The Panzerkampfwagen Eis Ausführung E, the Tiger I. Let's talk about what made this machine so terrifying, shall we? First, the gun. The 8.8-centimeter KWK 36L56. Now, that might sound like just numbers and letters to you, but to anyone who faced it, those specifications meant death. This wasn't just any gun. It was adapted from Germany's legendary 88-millimeter anti-aircraft gun, the Flak 36, which had already earned a fearsome reputation for destroying tanks in North Africa. But mounting it on a mobile armored platform? That changed everything. This gun could penetrate 100 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. Let me put that in perspective for you. A Sherman tank, the workhorse of the American Army, had frontal armor of 51 millimeters at best. The Tiger could punch through it like tissue paper from a kilometer away. Meanwhile, that Sherman would need to get within 200 meters, sometimes closer, to even have a hope of penetrating the Tiger's frontal armor. And even then, it was a prayer, not a guarantee. The ammunition this monster fired was equally impressive. Armor-piercing rounds weighing over 10 kilograms, traveling at 773 meters per second. When one of these rounds hit an enemy tank, the results were catastrophic. The penetration would send metal fragments ricocheting inside the crew compartment at supersonic speeds, shredding everything and everyone inside. Survivors of Tiger attacks reported seeing their comrades' tanks simply erupt, turrets blown clean off, hulls split open like cans. The psychological impact of knowing this weapon was out there somewhere on the battlefield cannot be overstated. Now, the armor. The Tiger's armor was revolutionary for its time, not just in thickness, but in design philosophy. The front hull plate was 100 millimeters thick, set at a slight angle. The turret front, 100 millimeters as well. The sides were 80 millimeters. Even the rear, typically the weakest point on any tank, was 80 millimeters. Compare this to the Sherman's side armor of 38 millimeters, and you begin to understand the disparity. But it wasn't just about thickness, it was about quality. German face-hardened armor plate was some of the best in the world, designed to defeat even the most advanced anti-tank rounds of the era. The Tiger's armor was laid out in a box-like configuration, vertical plates rather than sloped like the Soviet T-34. Now, historians and engineers have debated this choice for decades. Sloped armor offers better protection by increasing the effective thickness and improving the chance of deflection. So why didn't the Germans use it? Several reasons, actually. First, the manufacturing process for the Tiger was already complex enough. Sloped armor would have required even more sophisticated welding and construction techniques, slowing production further. Second, the sheer thickness of the Tiger's plates meant that even without sloping, most Allied weapons simply couldn't penetrate them anyway. Third, the box design provided more internal space for the crew, ammunition, and mechanical components. The Germans were confident, perhaps overly so, that raw thickness would be enough. And for a time, they were right. Reports from the Eastern Front in early 1943 describe Soviet tank crews emptying their entire ammunition load into a single Tiger, watching round after round bounce harmlessly off its armor before the Tiger calmly transversed its turret and destroyed them one by one. There are documented instances of Tigers taking dozens of hits and continuing to fight. One Tiger, commanded by SS Oberscharführer Franz Staudegger, engaged and destroyed 22 Soviet tanks in a single engagement near Kursk in July 1943, his Tiger absorbing multiple hits that left only paint scratches and minor dents. But let's talk about what it was like inside this beast, shall we? The crew, 5 men, a commander, a gunner, a loader, a driver, and a radio operator who also handled the whole machine gun. The interior was surprisingly spacious compared to other tanks of the era, that box design paying dividends in crew comfort. The commander sat in the turret with an excellent cupola design that offered superior visibility, 7 periscopes giving him a nearly 360-degree view of the battlefield. This was critical because situational awareness often meant the difference between life and death in armored combat. The gunner sat to the commander's left, operating the turret traverse and the main gun. The Tiger featured a hydraulic turret traverse system powered by the engine, a luxury that most Allied tanks lacked. This meant the gunner could rotate the massive turret smoothly and quickly, though it did have one significant drawback. When the engine was off or running at low RPM, the traverse became sluggish. The gunner also had access to the Turmziel Fernrohr TZF-9B, a sophisticated binocular sight that allowed for accurate engagement at extreme ranges. The loader, positioned to the commander's right, had perhaps the most physically demanding job. Each 88mm round weighed between 10 and 15 kilograms, and the Tiger carried 92 rounds of ammunition. In the heat of battle, with adrenaline pumping and explosions rocking the tank, the loader had to maintain a steady rate of fire, pulling heavy rounds from storage racks, loading them into the breech, and then bracing for the massive recoil. The best crews could achieve a rate of fire of around 6 to 8 rounds per minute, a testament to training and endurance. Down in the hull, the driver sat on the left side, operating the Tiger's complex transmission and steering system. This was no easy task. The Tiger used a sophisticated Maybach HL230 P45 V12 engine producing 700 horsepower, paired with a Maybach OLVAR OG40 1216 transmission. This transmission had 8 forward gears and 4 reverse gears, giving the driver considerable control over the tank's speed and maneuverability. However, it was also notoriously unreliable and difficult to operate, requiring significant skill and experience. Next to the driver sat the radio operator, manning the hull-mounted MG-34 machine gun and operating the communication equipment. Now, here's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean problematic. The Tiger tank was an engineering marvel, yes, but it was also an engineering nightmare. That Maybach engine, powerful as it was pushed to its limits, moving 56 tons of steel. Fuel consumption was appalling, roughly 300 liters per 100 kilometers on roads, and significantly worse cross-country. The Tiger's operational range was only about 140 kilometers on roads before it needed refueling. In combat conditions, with constant maneuvering and the stress of battle, this could drop to less than 60 kilometers. For a Wehrmacht that was already struggling with fuel shortages, especially after 1943, this was a serious problem. The transmission. The transmission. This was the Tiger's Achilles heel, quite literally. The Maybach OLVAR was a complex piece of machinery with hundreds of moving parts, gears, seals, and bearings, all subjected to enormous stress. It wasn't uncommon for Tigers to break down during road marches, the transmission simply giving up under the strain. There are documented cases of entire Tiger units being unable to participate in operations because half their tanks were in the workshop with transmission failures. The Germans tried to address this by limiting road speed and requiring regular maintenance, but in the chaos of war, especially on the Eastern Front, where conditions were brutal, keeping Tigers operational was a constant struggle. Then there's the matter of strategic mobility. The Tiger was too heavy for most bridges. At 56 tons, it exceeded the weight capacity of standard military bridges and many civilian structures. This meant Tiger units often had to ford rivers, a risky proposition that required special preparation. The Tiger could ford water up to 4 meters deep using a snorkel system, but this was time-consuming to set up and left the tank vulnerable. Alternatively, Tiger units had to detour to find bridges strong enough to support them, slowing their advance and making them predictable. Railroad transport was similarly challenging. The Tiger was too wide for standard rail cars when fitted with its combat tracks. The solution? Each Tiger came with 2 sets of tracks, narrow transport tracks and wide combat tracks. Before loading onto a rail car, the crew had to remove the outer road wheels and install the narrower tracks, a process that took several hours. Upon reaching their destination, the process had to be reversed. This added significant time and complexity to any strategic redeployment. But despite all these problems, all these mechanical headaches and logistical nightmares, the Tiger was absolutely devastating in combat. Let me take you to Tunisia, February 1943, the Battle of Sidi Bouzid. American forces, newly arrived in North Africa and still learning the brutal lessons of armored warfare, encounter Tigers for the first time. The 1st Armored Division's M4 Shermans and M3 Lee tanks advance confidently, expecting to engage German Panzer IIIs and IVs, opposites they can at least fight on somewhat equal terms. Instead, they run straight into Schwerpanzerabteilung 501, a heavy tank battalion equipped with Tigers. The Germans have chosen their position carefully, hull down on a ridgeline with excellent fields of fire. The Americans don't even see them at first. The Tigers are over 2,000 meters away, at the extreme edge of visibility in the desert haze. Then the 88mm guns open fire. The first shots are ranging rounds, but the German gunners are well trained. Corrections are made quickly. The next salvo is devastating. American tanks start exploding, turrets cartwheeling through the air, hulls bursting into flames. The American tankers are confused, terrified. Where is the fire coming from? They're taking catastrophic hits from an enemy they cannot see, cannot engage, cannot even locate. Some Sherman commanders try to close the distance. The only hope of survival is to get close enough to return fire. But the Tigers simply adjust their aim and keep firing. It's not a battle, it's a slaughter. By the end of the engagement, the Americans have lost over 40 tanks. The Tigers, not a single loss. 0. This pattern repeats across North Africa. At Kasserine Pass, Tigers spearheaded the German counteroffensive, smashing through American lines with impunity. Allied tank crews developed what military psychologists would later recognize as a very real, very debilitating fear. tiger terror, or tiger fright, they called it. The mere report of a tiger in the area could cause experienced tank crews to hesitate, to second-guess their orders, to feel that cold knot of fear in their guts. The British faced the same terror in Tunisia. At the Hunt's Gap in April 1943, a single tiger, commanded by tank ace Hauptmann Freiherr von Broich, held up an entire British armored column. Positioned in a narrow pass with perfect sight lines, von Broich's tiger destroyed 12 British tanks in quick succession. The British commander had no choice but to withdraw and call for artillery support. It took concentrated fire from multiple artillery batteries to finally force the tiger to retreat, and even then, it withdrew under its own power, damaged but operational. Now let's shift to the Eastern Front, where the tiger truly earned its reputation. The vast, open steppes of Russia might seem like ideal tank country, and in many ways they were, but they were also hell. The dust in summer clogged air filters and got into everything. The mud in spring and autumn could swallow tanks whole. And the Russian winter was an enemy all its own. Temperatures regularly dropped to -30, -40 degrees Celsius. Engines wouldn't start. Lubricants turned to sludge. Metal became brittle and fractured. Yet even in these conditions, the tiger proved its worth. At Kursk in July 1943, Operation Citadel, the Germans launched their last major offensive on the Eastern Front. This was the largest tank battle in history, thousands of tanks clashing across hundreds of kilometers. The Tigers were there, spearheading the German armored spearheads. On the northern sector, Schwerpanzerabteilung 505 pushed deep into Soviet defenses. The Soviets threw everything at them: T-34s, KV-1s, Su-152 assault guns, anti-tank guns by the hundreds. The Tigers plowed forward, their 88mm guns destroying Soviet armor with methodical precision. One Tiger, commanded by Feldwebel Kurt Knispel, who would go on to become the highest-scoring tank ace of all time, with 168 confirmed kills, destroyed 13 Soviet tanks in a single day at Kursk. His Tiger took multiple hits, but none penetrated. The Soviets learned quickly that frontal attacks on Tigers were suicide. They adapted their tactics, attempting to swarm Tigers with multiple T-34s, hoping to get side or rear shots while the Tiger was engaged with targets to the front. Sometimes this worked. At Prokhorovka on July 12, 1943, Soviet tank units closed to point-blank range in a desperate charge, using terrain and sheer numbers to overwhelm German positions. In the close-quarters chaos, several Tigers were knocked out by T-34s firing at their thinner side armor from suicidally close range. But the cost to the Soviets was horrific. Hundreds of tanks lost for every Tiger destroyed. The kill ratio was staggering, almost unbelievable. Some Tiger aces achieved ratios of 20-1, 30-1, even higher. But here's the thing about the Tiger that often gets overlooked in discussions of its combat effectiveness. There were never enough of them. Germany produced approximately 1,347 Tiger I tanks between August 1942 and August 1944. Compare that to the Sherman, over 49,000 produced, or the T-34, over 84,000 produced. The Tiger was expensive, costing about 250,000 Deutschmarks per unit and time-consuming to build, requiring roughly double the man-hours of a Panzer IV. Germany simply didn't have the industrial capacity to produce Tigers in the numbers needed to make a strategic difference. This scarcity meant that Tigers were concentrated in independent heavy tank battalions, Schwere Panzerabteilungen, typically containing 45 Tigers. These units were held as strategic reserves, deployed to critical sectors where their combat power could have maximum impact. This made tactical sense, but also meant that the psychological effect of the tiger was, in some ways, disproportionate to its actual battlefield presence. Allied soldiers feared the tiger far more than the statistics warranted, because every encounter was so one-sided, so devastating, that the fear spread through entire divisions. Western Front, June 1944, D-Day. The Allies are landing on the beaches of Normandy, and among the German forces rushing to contain the invasion is Schwere SS Panzerabteilung 101, equipped with Tiger 1s. On June 13, near Villers-Bocage, a single Tiger, commanded by SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, intercepts a British armored column from the 7th Armored Division, the famous Desert Rats who'd fought across North Africa. What happens next becomes one of the most famous tank engagements of the war. Wittmann's Tiger, along with 4 other Tigers from his company, ambushes the British column in the early morning. The British are strung out along a narrow road, a fatal mistake in Bocage country, where hedgerows limited visibility and maneuverability. Wittmann strikes first, his Tiger emerging from a side road and firing into the column's flank. Chaos erupts immediately. Over the next 15 minutes, Wittmann's Tiger destroys approximately 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns. He drives right into the town of Villers-Bocage itself, engaging targets at close range in the narrow streets, a gutsy move that shows either tremendous confidence or recklessness, perhaps both. The British are stunned, their advance completely disrupted. Eventually, Wittmann's Tiger takes damage from a concealed anti-tank gun, and he withdraws, but the damage is done. The British advance is stalled for days. One tank, one man, changing the course of a battle. Wittmann himself would be killed 2 months later, in August 1944, during Operation Totalize. His Tiger was hit and destroyed, either by a Canadian Sherman Firefly or by a British rocket-firing Typhoon aircraft. Accounts vary. But his legend lived on, and the legend of the Tiger with it. The Allies developed specific tactics to deal with Tigers, born of hard-won experience and a lot of blood. The Americans came up with the Rhino method for Shermans in Normandy, multiple Shermans working together, 1 or 2 serving as bait, while others tried to maneuver for flank shots. It was dangerous, often costing several Shermans for each Tiger killed, but it worked. The British deployed the Sherman Firefly, a Sherman variant equipped with a British 17-pounder gun, capable of penetrating Tiger armor at reasonable ranges. These were distributed through regular Sherman platoons, typically 1 Firefly for every 5 Shermans. The Soviets, never ones for subtlety, simply used mass. Throw enough T-34s at a Tiger, accept the losses, and eventually you'll get a flank shot or a lucky hit on a weak point. They also deployed heavier weapons. The Su-152 assault gun, with its 152mm howitzer, could knock out a Tiger with a single hit, though hitting a target at range with a howitzer was easier said than done. Later in the war, the Soviets fielded the IS-2 heavy tank with a 122mm gun, finally giving them a weapon that could engage Tigers on somewhat equal terms. Air power became increasingly important. The Allies achieved air superiority over both the Western and Eastern fronts by late 1944, and aircraft armed with rockets and bombs became the Tiger's most dangerous enemy. A Tiger might be nearly impervious to other tanks, but a 500-pound bomb landing anywhere nearby would kill it just as dead. German tank crews learned to move only at night, to hide in forests and buildings during the day to avoid the rocket-firing Typhoons and Thunderbolts that ruled the skies. And then there were the breakdowns. As the war dragged on, as Germany's industrial base was pounded by Allied bombing and resources became scarcer, the Tiger's mechanical problems worsened. Spare parts became difficult to obtain. Replacement engines were in short supply. Crew training suffered as experienced men were killed and replaced with hastily trained substitutes who lacked the skill to properly maintain these complex machines. More Tigers were lost to mechanical failure and abandonment than to enemy fire, a sad end for such a formidable weapon. In the final year of the war, Tigers became increasingly rare sights on the battlefield. Production had shifted to the Tiger II, the King Tiger, an even more powerful but also more problematic design. The surviving Tiger Is fought on, often immobilized and used as pillboxes, their mobility gone but their guns still deadly. In Berlin, in the final desperate days of April 1945, Tigers fought in the rubble-choked streets, taking on Soviet IS-2s and T-34s at ranges measured in meters rather than kilometers. Some fought until they ran out of ammunition, then the crews destroyed them and fled or died in the wreckage. So what is the legacy of the Tiger tank? In purely military terms, it was a strategic failure. Too expensive, too complex, produced in too few numbers, and requiring too many resources to maintain. Germany would have been better served producing more Panzer IVs and assault guns, simpler vehicles that could be built in greater quantities and kept operational more easily. The Tiger represented German engineering at its most ambitious, and also its most impractical. A weapon that looked impressive on paper, but whose strategic value was questionable. But in tactical terms, the Tiger was devastatingly effective. Its kill ratios were unmatched, its psychological impact was enormous, and it forced the Allies to completely rethink their armored doctrine. The fear it inspired was real and measurable, affecting Allied planning and tactics throughout the war. Even today, over 80 years later, the Tiger remains one of the most recognizable and feared weapons of World War II. Veterans who faced it never forgot. In countless interviews, Allied tank commanders described the cold dread they felt when they heard a Tiger was in their sector. The sound of its engine, that distinctive rumble, the sight of its massive bulk, the crack of the 88mm gun. These memories stayed with them for the rest of their lives. One Sherman veteran interviewed in the 1990s said simply, "When we saw a Tiger, we knew men were going to die. The only question was how many and who." There's something almost mythical about the Tiger, isn't there? This sense of a weapon that transcended its mechanical nature to become something more, a symbol of German military prowess, a manifestation of technological terror, a demon on tracks. Part of this is propaganda, certainly. The Germans played up the Tiger's invincibility, and the Allies, perhaps inadvertently, reinforced this image through their own accounts of facing it. But part of it is real, rooted in the genuine capabilities of the machine and the very real fear it inspired in those who faced it. Only 7 Tiger I tanks survive today in museums around the world. One, Tiger 131, held at the Tank Museum in Bovington, England, is the only one still in running condition. It was captured in Tunisia in 1943 after being immobilized by a lucky shot to its turret ring. Restored over decades, it occasionally runs for demonstrations, and the sound of that Maybach engine, the clink and clatter of those tracks, still raises the hair on the back of your neck. It's a direct connection to that terrible time, a reminder that these weren't just machines, they were instruments of war that decided the fates of thousands of men. The Tiger tank was not invincible, despite its reputation. It could be killed, it did have weaknesses, and ultimately it failed to change the outcome of the war. But for the men who faced it, for the tank crews who heard that 88mm gun crack in the distance and knew their armor was useless, for the infantrymen who watched helplessly as Tigers rolled through their positions, for them it was as close to invincible as made no difference. It was the beast that terrified Allied soldiers, and its roar echoed across the battlefields of World War II.